your attention, please. So it may be contrary to custom, but we're going to begin roughly close to on time. If there's a false start later, simply ignore it. You're wise to be here rather than elsewhere because you're about to hear a really interesting paper. Margaret Monahan Hogan, not speaking relatively to other speakers, of course, is the quid recipiter secunda modus recipientis. And you can say that again. Peg Hogan is the McNerney Hansen Chair in Ethics and Professor of Philosophy at the University of Portland. She has her bachelor's degree from Immaculata College, a master's from Fordham University, and a PhD from Marquette. She was an adjunct at Scranton University of Scranton for about 5 years, all the time, as far as I can tell, birthing and raising children that are an uncountable finitude, although she can name them each, or at least alleges that she can. Until 1992, when she moved to King's College. She was foolish enough to move there as acting chair, sign that you can be very bright and not very wise at the same time. And while there, both chaired the philosophy department, but also became the founding director of the King's College Center for Ethics and Public Life. She stayed there until 1992 when she was lured out to the other coast, to what we call the left coast around here, where she has been working productively ever since. She has written two very interesting books on marriage, one called Finality and Marriage, the other called Marriage as a Relationship, and then a host of articles, some on biomedical issues, some on theology, with a distinct penchant for the work of Bernard J.F. Lonergan, so now you know. And then, oddly enough, some very interesting work on commercial speech, a doctrine that only a constitutional law aficionado could even respect. She's married to Thomas Hogan, and as I mentioned, is the mother of, I'm now told, 6 children. I've been corrected since I began to speak. She is going to speak today about courage as a necessary virtue for the Catholic philosopher. Okay?
Thank you, John, for that very generous introduction. I am the mother of 6 children. Tom and I are the parents of 6 children, and I can name their names. Perhaps not their birth dates, but I surely can name their names. Thank you for coming. I just can't imagine that this many people came knowing that you could go and hear Ralph, because I really wanted to go and hear Ralph today and not hear me. So thank you all for coming. I do appreciate that. Speaking as I am on one of the last days of the conference and toward the end of the conference, it's very hard because you think, what can you possibly say that hasn't already been said? And so that makes it difficult. What makes it fun to speak later on is that you get to cite what other people said in the conference, and you get to put these correctives in your paper that you hear from people so that you tighten up what you want to say. So what I want to do today is a couple of things, and I hope that you'll have the patience to bear me out. It's a little bit of a long paper. What I want to talk about is first the role of the Catholic philosopher, and then which I think is important in the university. I think that's a very important element. I want to talk about the courage of the Catholic philosopher, and then I want to talk a little bit about, or try a little bit to be courageous about a festering issue in the church, not pedophilia, though, okay? Some other festering issue in the church. So that's the broad outlines of what I want to say. So let me begin. The papal document Ex Corde Ecclesiae speaks of the special kind of service that marks or ought to mark a Catholic university. Service as the proclamation of truth, without which freedom, justice, and human dignity are extinguished. So often when we think of service as a component of a Catholic university, we think most often of it as social justice, in the limited sense of service to the vulnerable, the exercise of the preferential option for the poor, and we involve our students in a variety of service projects. At the University of Portland, there are banners throughout our campus proclaiming teaching, faith, and service, and this apotheme is part of every address by every administrator, to every parent group, to every visiting group, and every student group, and it forms a central element in every single research grant that we write. As a matter of fact, we often proclaim that no student should graduate from a Catholic college or university without having participated in a service project. This university, the University of Notre Dame, and my own university, the University of Portland, keep careful statistics, develop databases recording our students' service activities, and we report these with great pride. Our alums are encouraged to continue this as a way of life, and I must acknowledge how impressed I am to receive correspondence from the many Catholic institutions, Immaculata, Fordham, and Marquette, with which I have had affiliation, and in which they recount the current service activities of their members and invite me to participate. Now, I think this is a wonderful accomplishment, and I want to say that from the start, and I applaud its inclusion and its expansion as one of the special marks of the Catholic University as Catholic, the university qua Catholic. So, too, I would want to make special note of the work of campus ministry and its service in developing the life of prayer and the celebration of liturgy as one of the special marks of the Catholic University qua Catholic. It is the role of campus ministry to pass on the religious patrimony in the form of immersing students in liturgical practice and prayer. The Catholic University must worship. Here, Karina Delkis Combs-Hayes is absolutely right. The Catholic University must worship. It is our enduring hope through these practices of service and prayer that there will be the personal transformation of our students, and it will equip them to be agents of peace and justice through their formation in prayer and service in whatever segment of the world that they live and in whatever place they practice their professions. Again, a special mark of the Catholic University qua Catholic. However, what are the special marks of the Catholic University as a university, qua university? How does it offer that special service, that concern with, that search for, and that proclamation of the truth without which freedom, justice, and human dignity are extinguished? Do we even explicitly recognize and acknowledge the pursuit of truth as a distinct service central to the mission of the Catholic University? And if we acknowledge that distinct service as central to the mission of the university, what then is the role of the Catholic scholar? And what are the obligations of the Catholic scholar to that service? Of course, the topic of the role of the Catholic scholar in the service of truth, without which there can be no real freedom, no real justice, and no authentic integrity, is too large a topic. So let me narrow it down to a consideration of the role of the Catholic philosopher in the Catholic University. And let me share with you some of my thoughts that resulted from my own reflection on my role as a Catholic philosopher. Not as a reflection on the role as if it were an accomplishment, but rather as an objective, as a regulative matrix to guide and direct and measure the task of philosophy. The required starting point is acknowledging who I am as a Catholic philosopher and appropriating that identity. The Lonergan language already, appropriation, right? The Catholic philosopher occupies a particular position and operates from within a particular perspective. This is not said as some triumphal claim, but to acknowledge it as a reality, a particularity, if you will, a reality to be both dealt with and to be enjoyed. I say to enjoy because it is the most liberating of experiences to operate from the confidence rooted in the religious belief that the pursuit of truth brings me to the ultimate truth, to God. The Catholic philosopher ought to fear no study. I believe this realization was at the root of the often repeated exhortation of Pope John Paul II, be not afraid. And I say to be dealt with because this role places certain obligations on me. As a Catholic, the philosopher is simultaneously committed to philosophy and to faith. She has duties to the academy as discipline and as institution, including contributing to its flourishing. She has duties to her church and to its flourishing. She may not function as if the truths of her religious tradition may be substituted for expertise in philosophy, and she may not function as if the Son of God had not become man in order to redeem us from sin, to send us forth with a mission to reach the truth with the Holy Spirit to guide and sustain us until we return at last unto the Father. I often thought that the prayer of St. Ignatius Loyola to be an apt reflection, perhaps a daily exercise for the Catholic philosopher. For those of you who don't come from a Jesuit tradition, let me repeat that prayer. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will, all that I have and all that I possess. Thou hast given all to me. To thee, O Lord, I return it. All is thine. Dispose of it according to thy will. Give me thy love and thy grace, for this is sufficient for me. Perhaps this ought to be the prayer of every Catholic scholar. Let me return now to delineating more specific roles for the Catholic philosopher, and I think there are 4 distinct roles. They are the teaching of philosophy in the university. The second is the role of engaging in our profession, our colleagues who share our tradition. The third is the role of practicing our profession among our colleagues who do not share our religious tradition. And the fourth is the role of the Catholic philosopher in service to the Church. Since other scholars, including Professor Alfred Freddoso of this university, have written so competently of the first 3, let me just mention a couple of points that they have written before me, and then let me turn my attention to the last, that is, the role of the Catholic philosopher in service to the Church. The role of, so now just to the major points that Fred and others have made. The role of teaching philosophy in the university requires understanding of the domain of philosophy and competence in the field. Philosophy is the pursuit of wisdom, and as the pursuit of wisdom, it enjoys a double unity, a unity in the object and the unity in the subject. This pursuit of wisdom serves to unify the various disciplines within philosophy, that is, they are seen as subsets of the set, parts that contribute to but are not equal to the whole. The parts, such as logic, epistemology, philosophy of mind, philosophy of human nature, and so forth, have all grown in sophistication and complication to the degree that the particular discipline may require the focused attention of the lifetime of a particular scholar. As a consequence, these parts are often mistaken for the whole. We must continue to remind ourselves and each other of the ordering end of philosophy toward wisdom and of the important contributions that are made by the parts. The pursuit of philosophy as united in the subject, as the pursuit of its end wisdom, is transformative of the subject. And because the subject is rational, affective, moral, and spiritual, the study of philosophy intends the intellectual, affective, moral, and spiritual development of the subject. And the study fails if it does not accomplish that end. To paraphrase a famous philosopher, the philosopher, and with no apology, we study philosophy not to know wisdom, but to be wise. This double unity of philosophy places great demands on those who would teach philosophy. On the objective side, it requires the philosopher to know the field, to master some part, to understand the relation of the parts to the whole, as well as the limitations of the part, and to receive from others their partial contribution of the whole. This requires us to understand the object of philosophy in the language of Professor Freddoso as an abiding regulative ideal, the integration of the ancillary philosophical disciplines and the natural sciences and the human sciences into a comprehensive account of reality. On the subjective side, the pursuit of philosophy requires the philosopher to pursue wisdom and to manifest in living the integration of the moral, affective, intellectual, and spiritual life in that struggle to obtain wisdom, to witness the philosophical life. The enormity of the task that faces philosophy is not an occasion for arrogance or pride, but rather the opportunity to acknowledge the dependence of philosophy on others for the expertise of their fields, and to acknowledge philosophy as an ongoing work to be accomplished and not a finished product. This understanding draws philosophers, or ought to draw philosophers, out of their departments, beyond the clever, agonistic, and sometimes heuristic exchanges that occupy center stage there, and into the world and into the university. Into the world, their collaboration with physicians, lawyers, lawmakers, and entrepreneurs sharpens their philosophical claims against the hard edge of reality and holds the claims, the sometimes pragmatic and expedient claims, of physicians, lawyers, lawmakers, and entrepreneurs to the fire of truth, so that their work may, with a firm grasp of the truth, serve freedom, justice, and human dignity. This reciprocity serves the good of both. A similar collaboration is appropriate to the university. The philosopher leaves the comfort of the department to enter into the university to collaborate with her colleagues, with other philosophers, but also with theologians, with chemists, with biologists, with physicists, with historians, and with political thinkers. The university, thus animated by the spirit of Catholic philosophy, becomes the place where the integration of knowledge for the purpose of wisdom that can no longer be attained by one individual is pursued. Such integration has been called for by Ex Corde Ecclesiae. Now let me turn to the topic that I really want to focus on, and that is the role of the Catholic philosopher in the service of truth as service to the Church. This seems to require three things of the faithful Catholic philosopher. The first is our acknowledgement of infallible truth that has been proclaimed, and the taking of those truths into our lives. The second is our attentive listening and generous response to those non-infallible truths that appear to contribute to human flourishing as we journey toward God. The third is our deep, careful, respectful examination of those truths that appear to be problematic or appear to impede human flourishing as we journey toward God, and our attentive work to contribute to their clarification and, if necessary, correction, so that truth may be accomplished to truly serve human dignity, freedom, and justice. Of course, 1 and 2 are not problematic. It is 3 that holds our attention and is our obligation as a Catholic philosopher. There needs to be a reciprocity operative here that is isomorphic to the reciprocity and the respectful changes between the philosopher and the world, between the philosopher and the attorneys and physicians and entrepreneurs, and the respectful exchange between the philosopher and the university. To forsake this obligation as a Catholic philosopher places at risk the very possibility of the necessity of development of church teaching. To take this obligation without clear recognition of the authority of the Church, and the source of that authority is given by Christ, without careful study of the issue or the document at hand, and outside our field of expertise, is to risk hubris and scandal. And we have witnessed a great deal of that. Pick up the Observer and see the comments in the Observer on a papal document that has not yet been released. Amazing, truly amazing. This service by the university to the Church has been called for by the Church, and I think is clearly stated by Pope Leo XIII in Aeterni Patris, Vedere Novus Algere et Perficere. Leo XIII is acknowledging the dialectical development of the old and the new, perfected and augmented by each other, perfecting and augmenting each other. So here I'm developing, I think, a theme that is complementary to the theme of the conference so graciously hosted by Lumen Christi at the University of Chicago in May under the title, What Can Philosophers Learn from the Tradition? And what I want to say here is that philosophers need to put their service to the tradition, and they need to serve the tradition, and the tradition needs to learn also from the philosophers. Now, as I began to think about this role, how should I do this and how can I do it, I thought to myself, this is not an easy task, even if embraced in joy, and I began to wonder if I had the courage to do it. Here comes the courage part. Surely others have tried to do it and have paid a penalty. And here's where I began to wonder about courage and the philosopher, and I began to think about something strange. Those of us who teach ethics often teach the virtue ethics of Aristotle, and in that teaching we delineate the moral virtues and the reference of each moral virtue to the appropriate mean. When we teach of courage, we take great pains to show that courage is something particular. It is to be distinguished from temperance and piety and magnanimity and so forth, even as it is united with these in the great soul person. And if a particular situation calls for courage, it is not appropriate to respond piously. One must respond courageously. Now, as I remember myself teaching this year after year, and I just taught it last week, I began to wonder about the examples that I used in the classroom to illustrate Aristotle's theoretical point. The courage of the pilot, the courage of the firefighter, the courage of the political leader, those who step forward in the name of freedom to determine our own nation. And I speak of the vices of those who are pusillanimous and foolhardy, and appropriate examples drawn from current events. The particular thing that I noticed is that over the years that I've taught, and John's given you a long chronicle of the years that I've taught, I have never cited the philosopher. And I have never talked about the courage of the philosopher as an example. I wonder if anybody here who teaches philosophy has ever cited the Courage of the Philosopher when you are teaching that particular section in Aristotle. This despite the fact that just a few classes ago I taught of the integrity of Socrates. So I began to wonder how I might describe that or think about it. In addition to my wonderment about the fact that I have never considered an example of courage on the part of the philosopher, I was struck by an additional fact. As someone whose work has been in applied ethics, especially medical ethics and business ethics, I've often found myself in the position of enjoining businessmen and women and physicians to be courageous in their vocation. I've told them that they must take courageous stands, sometimes against the advice of corporate attorneys and hospital risk managers. Easy for me. I'm a bioethicist, you know. They're not going to sue me. Look at the Art Kaplan case, right? So I've asked them, I've told them they must be courageous and they must take these stands within the corporation and within the hospital, despite the risks, real and professional, personal and financial, that they perceived as theirs. I gave them no quarter, and when they told me that they found themselves standing in a raging storm with strong winds buffeting them, and that they perceived themselves as standing there alone, I simply and regularly told them that that was their vocation, their role, and this is what was required of them. No, you may not allow the family to stop a feeding tube order on that family member who had just recently suffered a stroke. No, you may not allow your colleague to perform heart surgery on that frail elderly woman that we all know will not survive. No, you may not permit the surgeon to badger the family, and no, you may not allow your corporation to enter into a business arrangement with those who violate human rights in order to hold yourself at arm's length from implication in the practice. And so on, and so on, and so on. How then would I be courageous as a philosopher? What does it mean to be courageous as a philosopher? Well, Aristotle tells us the particular notes of courage, and he says that the courageous person must endure and fear the right things for the right moment, for the right motive, in the right manner, at the right time, and displaying confidence in a similar way. The courageous person endures and acts for an end that is noble, choosing and enduring what he does or she does, because it is noble to do so and base to refuse. Choosing the courageous act is motivated by virtue, by the desire for the noble object, and by a sense of shame. Now, while Aristotle applies these characteristics to those quintessential courageous acts, the warrior in battle and the dying as they face death, it seems to me it is appropriate to apply them to the philosopher, and to ask that the philosopher be courageous in the fulfillment of her role as philosopher. How does the philosopher fulfill her role? Here, the role that I've made clear is her service to the intellectual life of the church. And how does she do that courageously? How does she choose and endure the pursuit of what is noble, that truth without which freedom, justice, and human dignity are extinguished, fearing not to do so because it would be shameful not to do so, and enduring the task, held up in confidence in its pursuit because the end is noble? Now, if I'm going to make claims about the obligation of a Catholic philosopher to be courageous in her service to the church, I'd better start with myself. Attend the mote in your own eye before attending the mote in the eyes of the others. There are many festering issues in the church today that the Catholic philosopher might attach her expertise to. Let me cite just a few. All of the issues that stemmed from the unresolved abortion debate. Abortion itself, the use of embryonic stem cells, pre-birth and pre-implantation genetic testing. All of these are festering issues in the life of the church and the life of the nation today. Another is the role of women. Another is the role of marriage. Remember, I promised that I would not touch upon pedophilia. My first choice of a topic was abortion. It is a festering sore. It infects every election, every political appointment, and the ethical advance of science and medicine that requires the use of the embryo. It still takes great courage to address this issue. It took much greater courage to address the issue when the Catholic hierarchy stayed on the sidelines, as they did very early following Roe v. Wade. and lay people stepped out in leadership to examine that issue. And these lay people risked a great deal. They were spat upon, cursed, insulted, threatened. So it was a very difficult time to do that. But I'm not sure that much can be said about abortion anymore. Adequate responses have been made to all of the philosophical arguments. A rich metaphysics has been developed to adequately describe the growth and development of human life. All of that has been presented. The distinction between classical laws and statistical laws renders ridiculous the claim that since 40 or 50 or 60 or more recently, 80% of embryos die before birth, that they are not human. So there's not much that I can add here. It generally doesn't take a great deal of courage to speak out on the issue of abortion. It does, though, take perseverance. That is, we have to educate every generation, every class as they come through our Catholic institutions, so that we give them the appropriate tools and categories to talk about this issue. We need to still address the issue. This requires perseverance, I think, not so much courage. And in this perseverance, we need to address all those positions that are put forth in learning ignorance to defend a practice that is so damaging to life, to the culture, and to women. What about the role of women in the academy? Now, I did tell Karen that I would contribute to that later this afternoon, but surely there is enough stuff there to get our passions going. We would have to, of course, start with the acknowledgement of the fundamental equality of men and women, and then acknowledge immediately of the real material differences between men and women. Now, how we would deal with that would again take a great deal of passion, a great deal of patience, and a willingness to discriminate. Yes, we would have to discriminate, but we would have to discriminate because there are real distinctions there. So I'm left with marriage and the multiple problems surrounding questions about the nature of marriage. What might the Catholic philosopher contribute to that debate? As Helen mentioned last night, this is the next really ugliest debate that we will face, and I don't think we can step away from it. There are three challenges in the contemporary world that press for the critical examination and careful articulation of Catholic teaching on the nature of marriage. They are these three: the possibility of marriage between persons of a homosexual orientation, the regulation of the reproductive finality within marriage, and the possibility of declaration of dissolution of a marriage by a decree of nullity or divorce. And in this critical examination, there lies the possibility of the development of doctrine. But we ought not to fear that. Now, you know I'm already treading on difficult waters. We ought not to fear that, the possibility of the development of doctrine. We need to have the courage to pursue the truth, so that the correct understanding of the nature of marriage will truly serve freedom, justice, and human dignity. I think Professor Gleason referred to the perfect storm that had surrounded us since the 1960s. And he's right, there was a perfect storm, but I think it was most destructive, and so destructive because something was wrong with our navigation. Our navigational instruments seemed to be frozen on absolutes, and I think if you look at the historical moment, you can see the reason why the freezing on absolutes. We had just come out of the experience of the Second World War and the Holocaust and communism, and so they were frozen, but it seemed that when we tried to unfreeze them in the contemporary culture that followed in the late 60s, that what happened is it went all the way over to relativism, and we didn't seem to have the instrumentation in place that would enable us to move between these two shoals that could easily cause our wreck. So let me say something first of all about the development of doctrine, and then let me turn my attention to the nature of marriage. Now, those of you who read First Things know that Avery Dulles has an article on this in the very current issue of First Things. I've not completely done Avery's article, but I find it to be interesting. So what I want to say about the development of doctrine is this. While there's great stability in Catholic teaching, the teachings of the Church have changed over time. This claim should present a problem for no one who has studied the history of the Church. Change in teaching, including the teachings on marriage, has, as a matter of historical fact, changed, as have other changes in both the speculative and practical domains of doctrine. On the speculative side, early attempts to express and define appropriate language to express the mystery of the Trinity was a matter of change. The efforts to express the dignity of Mary serves again as another change in our speculative theology. Attempts to give an account of the Trinity using material symbols failed. The account of the Trinity that was proffered by St. Augustine, based on the understanding of the operations of the mind and the procession of the inner words, was more satisfying. This Augustinian account, while not dispelling the mystery, afforded the mind repose. The understanding of the role of Mary has advanced as her role of Mother of God, her Immaculate Conception, and her Assumption have been explicated. On the practical side of theological development, there is an extensive list of changes, including the transitions from the acceptance of slavery to its condemnation. Here you will easily recognize that I am writing out of the tradition of John Noonan. From the prohibition of interest taking on money to the acceptance of capitalist but not materialist principle of the right of the individual to use money to make money. From the indissolubility of marriage to the dissolution of certain marriages for the sake of the faith, and from the requirement of the persecution of heretics, and from the teaching that outside the churches there is no salvation, to the declaration of religious freedom. A most recent change at present is the transition from the acceptance of capital punishment as the appropriate societal means of self-defense to the reluctant acceptability of capital punishment in only the rarest of circumstances, that is, circumstances which are very rare if in fact they ever occur. This from Evangelium Vitae. This change was the subject of much heated conversation in the first conference in this series, that is, in the Conference of the Culture of Death. How then are these changes to be understood? That is, how can it be maintained that at one and the same time the Church is the repository of truth and that there is development of doctrine? That these changes represent development in doctrine cannot be denied. However, the advance in teaching is not a change in truth, but rather a change in the understanding of the truth. Truth itself does not change. The Vatican Council said insight grows into both words and the realities that are handed on. It is insight that changes, not truth. And in this insight, sometimes the change is development, the implicit becomes explicit, and sometimes the change is correction. Changes in the understanding of interest-taking, changes in the understanding of slavery and of marriage and religious freedom have come about as the core principles regarding their understanding have been replaced by other core principles. John Noonan described the change in this way. These principles were replaced by principles already part of Christian teaching. In the case of usury, that the person of the lender, not the loan, should be the focus of evaluation. In the case of marriage, that the preservation of faith is more important than the preservation of a human relationship. And in the case of slavery, that in Christ there is neither free nor slave. And in the case of religious liberty, that faith must be free. In the course of this displacement of one set of principles, what was forbidden became lawful, what was permissible became unlawful in the case of slavery, and what was required became forbidden, the persecution of heretics. End of the Noonan quote. Similarly, John Henry Newman, whom we all cite as the patron saint of development of doctrine, describes the developmental changes not as a matter of deduction, but as the result of the hard work of men and women. I added the women part. Newman did not have women. It's the result of the hard work of men and women, utilizing the powers of the mind to approach a better understanding of the truth. Newman says the development then of an idea is not like the investigation worked out on paper, in which each successive advance is pure evolution from a foregoing, but it is carried out through and by means of community of men and their leaders and guides. It employs their minds as its instruments and depends upon them while it uses them. It is the warfare of ideas under their varying aspects striving for mastery. The warfare of ideas. Okay, so that's the development of doctrine part. Let me turn now to marriage and present an account on the nature of marriage as simply as a starting point of a discussion. So, let me acknowledge right from the very beginning what marriage is. And I want to say that marriage is in its essential nature a union. Now, everybody puts their head down and says, yes, marriage is a union. The point that I want to make, though, is that while this is said often and quoted often, this notion of marriage as a union is neglected in the examination of the critical questions facing marriage today. The focus centers rather on the procreative end of marriage and the personalist ends of marriage. I want to focus on the union itself. We are a Trinitarian people, and we ought to have the capacity to do that. Marriage is a union between one man and one woman. It originates in a covenant between them. The covenant is promised, that is, it is ratified in an act of consent. While a man and a woman are at liberty to consent to enter into marriage, they are not free to determine what marriage is. The consent requires the desire and the antecedent capacity to bring into reality the marriage union. Marriage is a reality in the objective order. Marriage is a natural social institution. It is an intermediary institution between the individual and the government. It has a good of its own, and it serves the good of the individual and the good of the polity. It has an essential nature as a particular type of human relationships. While it has similarities to other types of human relationships, it is sui generis, a unique kind of relationship. Within the marriage relationship, other goods, including the good of children, if there are to be children of this marriage, and the good of sexual satisfaction are to be accomplished. The marriage union is a particular type of human relationship. It is an intimate community of marital life and love. The consent is spoken in words and signified in action. That is, initially physically consummated in the normal course of events in a particular type of act, the marriage act. The giving of consent in words and act marks the becoming of the marriage, what used to be called the matrimonium in fieri. Following the consent, the intimate union, the matrimonium in facto esse, begins to emerge as a new being, marked as a singularity in being, a singularity in consciousness, and a singularity in conscience emerges. This new being, the marriage, is brought to completion, that is, more fully consummated over a lifetime. The conjugal act most precisely signifies an intimate personal union, which is marked by self-donation and self-acceptance. It is a union, emotional, physical, and spiritual, formed by one man and one woman. As a reality in the objective order, marriage is an entity constituted in the real relationship of subject to subject. The relation, a union, is established as a nexus or connection between two persons who are in their nature mutually ordered to each other. The spouses as principles of the relationship are those whose to be, precisely as spouses, is to be ordered to each other. Each acts in the other, and each acts upon the other. The spouses, then, are the related complementary principles of the being that is marriage. The marriage is a being in itself. Just as marriage, reified in the marriage bond, is the appropriate juridical entity in canon law, that is, it has privileged standing in the legal order, so too marriage itself is the moral entity in the ethical order. Actions of the related principles, the spouses, must be evaluated from within the context of the moral entity, the marriage. It is the marriage, not the persons individually, not the reproductive organs in isolation, that has privileged standing in the moral order. As a union, the marriage is a personal relationship, a kind of human friendship between a man and a woman, each embodying a particular aspect of humanity. This union of sexually differentiated persons instantiates ontological completeness. The relationship begins on the horizontal plane as a consequence of attraction and desire on the level of sensitive appetite. The essential nature of humanity as male and female includes the inclination of each to desire the other in a way to be united to the other. Because humanity as male and female has a complex nature, that is, physical, appetitive, rational, and spiritual, the union has a similarly complex nature that is physical, appetitive, rational, and spiritual. It is a union of persons. It is a personal union that results in a bond that is more fully a union than a physical bond. While the resultant personal unity has characteristics in common with both physical and moral unions, It is in itself a unique species of unity. The formation of this love-directed union has been described in the following by Hildebrand. Their love tends to a unique union, even in part constitutes it, as a community where two persons constitute a closed union which can exist only between them. Conjugal love constitutes a relationship in the regard of each one of the parties is turned exclusively upon the other. Because the union of marriage is a union of human beings, the union is marked by that same complexity that is inherent in human life. The end of the marriage union, the end is final causality, the good, is not accomplished only on the physical level. The end is appropriate to the agent. Final causality draws the human agent on the horizontal level to its essential good, on the vertical level to its excellent good, and on the transcendental level to its absolute good. The essential, excellent, and transcendent ends of marriage are respectively the organistic union, the union of friendship, and the union with God. On the level of horizontal finality, the union emerges as a consequence of a basic form of appetition in which human beings, as male and female, are properly attracted to and properly respond to one another. This pleasurable experience acts upon the relationship in such a way that the relationship is more easily disposed to the transforming power of reason. On the level of vertical finality, the transforming power of reason operates within the organistic union and brings about the emergence of friendship between the spouses. This integration of reason and intense passion as habitual and reciprocal forms the set of conditions which incline toward the emergence of unity of consciousness and conscience. The triple unity of body, consciousness, and conscience supplies the fertile matrix for the sustained development of the spouses that makes the marital union receptive to the transformative power of grace. This ascent from passion to friendship to total love within marriage was described by Bernard Lonergan when he was writing in The Shadow of Castiganubi. He said, "Not only is it true that man should love other objects in virtue of his love of God, it is also true that he can only love God in an ascent through participated to absolute excellence. Thus, love of others is proof of love of God. God himself dwells in us if we love one another. His love is brought to perfection within us." Now, Lonergan continues, "Toward this high goal of charity, it is no small beginning in the weak and imperfect heart of fallen man to be startled by a beauty that shifts the center of appetition out of himself. And such a shift is effected on the level of sensitive spontaneity by eros, leaping in through delighted eyes and establishing itself as unrest in absence and in imperious demand for company. Next, company may reveal deeper qualities of mind and character to shift again the center from the merely organistic tendencies of nature to rational friendship with its enduring basis in the excellence of the good person. Finally, grace inserts into charity the love which nature gives and reason approves. Thus we have, Lonergan concludes, a dispositive upward tendency from eros to friendship and from friendship to that special order of charity. So in summary, what I'm saying here is that the essential nature of marriage is a particular type of union. The capacity to establish this kind of union requires a man and a woman who have the capacity to accomplish the union with each other in the life of their marriage. This union may be described as the intrinsic, necessary end of marriage, and it was so in the language of Alphonsus Liguori. So the language of union is not new in the tradition, and the language and the description of marriage as a union is not new in the tradition. It has simply been a neglected notion in the tradition. It is at least as old as the Nicomachean Ethics and the Politics of Aristotle, a philosophical position from whom the tradition draws a great deal. There, Aristotle offers some observations about the nature of the marriage union itself. He also describes marriage as an institution for reproduction and the nurture of children, but he focuses on marriage as a union itself too. And he claims that marriage is, by its nature, a joining of two into oneness. That is, marriage is a physis-syndiastikon. Men and women are brought together in marriage, Aristotle says, by the natural impulse of sexual appetite. The marital union, Aristotle claims, is as a union prior to the civil community, and this priority is temporal as well as necessary. Thomas Aquinas also wrote of the nature of marriage as a union. In that part of the Summa, which is designated as the supplement to the Summa Theologiae, a work of his youth, he describes the marriage union and its purpose. In his characterization of the kind of joining that constitutes the union that is marriage, he describes marriage both as a unity of being, as a unity of purpose. In regard to marriage as a unity in being, that is the bond, Thomas maintains that the bond between the spouses is the reality that is contained in the marriage. He says, and this is Thomas Aquinas, the bond between husband and wife resulting from those acts is reality and sacrament. The ultimate reality contained is the effect of the sacrament, while the non-contained reality is that which the master assigns, the master being, of course, Peter Lombard. The reality signified that Thomas Aquinas is talking about, but not contained in the marriage, is the notion of marriage on the model of the union of Christ with his church. The union of Christ with the church is not the reality contained in the sacrament, but is simply signified and not contained. Moreover, Thomas notes the physical and spiritual aspects of the union which contribute to its constitution as a personal union. He says, the joining together of bodies and minds is the result of matrimony. And again, in describing the marital union, he says, for the joining of husband and wife by matrimony is the greatest of all joinings, since it is the joining of soul and body. Wherefore we call it the conjugal union. Because marriage is in its essence a joining together, Aquinas maintains that reference to marriage as a conjugal union is appropriate. In regard to the joining of purpose, he says, by marriage certain persons are directed to the begetting and uprearing of children, and again in one family life, in respect of which we speak of husband and wife. Furthermore, in consideration of marriage as a relation, Thomas maintains that every relation has a unity in the cause of the relationship and a diversity inasmuch as the subjects that are related in terms of that cause are diverse subjects. Now, inasmuch as marriage has a unity of purpose and a unity of being, there is a cause that relates the diverse subjects in the unity of purpose, and there is a cause that relates the diverse subjects in the unity of being. In regard to the unity of being, the cause that relates the subjects is the marriage bond. The diverse subjects are man as inclined to woman, and woman as inclined to man, spouses. In regard to the unity of purpose, the cause that relates the subjects is procreation. This focus on the essential nature of marriage as a particular type of union should help us in ordering the goods of marriage. This human relationship that is marriage is differentiated from other human relations in the following way. This relation is, in its essential nature, the actual personal union of the partners, each of whom represents a partial manifestation of humanity, to form this new reality, this new being, the marriage. Within this union, the procreation and education of children are to be accomplished if there are to be children of this union. And within this union, the satisfaction of sexual appetite of the individual partners as individual is to be accomplished as each helps and enjoys the other, and each renders the debt to the other. There are then three ends to be accomplished within marriage. They are the union, which is the essential, intrinsic, necessary end of marriage, children, and the flourishing of the individual partners. To use the language of Alphonsus Liguori, once again, children and the satisfaction of our sexual appetites are intrinsic contingent ends of marriage. That is, they are to be accomplished within marriage under the rule of reason in marriage. Now, the point that I'm trying to make here is that the understanding of marriage as a particular kind of union is critical to the understanding of the ordering of the ends of marriage, of the possibility of anyone entering into marriage, and of the possibility of the dissolution of what appears to be a marriage by divorce or annulment. If marriage is a union of the kind I describe, a natural social institution, then persons of the same sex may not constitute marriage. Neither the government nor the church created marriage. Marriage exists as a natural kind thing. The government, in recognizing the crucial role of marriage for the good of the individual and for the good of society, puts structures into place to privilege that institution. The church, recognizing that marriage is a natural institution and recognizing that Christ raised marriage to a sacrament, blesses the marriage and celebrates marriage as embedded in a liturgical celebration. If offspring are the intrinsic contingent end of marriage, understood as a unity of purpose, then when we turn our attention to marriage, we will have to once again turn our careful attention to the regulation of this end, how this end is to be accomplished within marriage. If marriage as a union is not just a physical union, but a union of consciousness and conscience, then the couple who begin a marriage through their consent and the physical union, the matrimonium in fieri, must, if they are to truly consummate their marriage, that is, to truly complete their marriage, accomplish the matrimonium in facto esse. They must direct their marriage to its accomplishments on the higher level of unity until at last they rest with God. Now, if we can develop that notion, we will pay careful attention to the nurturing of our young people as they enter marriage and as they attempt to sustain their marriage through the careful attention of the church. Let me conclude so that you do indeed have time for questions. And in my conclusion, I want to say that some people will consider these remarks courageous. Others will think them cowardly. The work on marriage is not brave enough to embrace committed relationships of persons with homosexual relations. Others will think the work foolhardy. To suggest a careful reconsideration on the teaching of the regulation of the reproductive finality, they will claim is to open the floodgates of unfettered sexual practices and of demonizing and of dehumanizing reproductive practices. I present my understanding of the essential nature of marriage as a union merely as a starting point. And I ask that discourse begin within the Catholic University by those who love the Church, by those who love the university, and by those who love its wisdom. And I ask that this work be done in the quiet of the hard and serious and sustained and patient and persevering study without any rush to sound bites. In what manner, then, ought this discourse to take place? With justice and with grace. Let me return once again to my roots in the Jesuit educational charism, to the words of Gerard Manley Hopkins. The just man justices, keeps grace, that keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye what he is in God's eye, for in God's eye he is Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father, through the features of men's faces. Thank you for your attention. I guess I should take my penalty first. Tris?
I thought it was a wonderful and rich presentation. And there's so many things to respond to. I mean, first I was tempted to respond on usury, this remark. For the first 1,000 years of the Universal Church, there were no canons against laymen taking interest, only against deacons, priests, and bishops. That's why I've allowed myself to be ordained to being a reader, so I can still charge interest and whatever writing to non-disgusting Yankees, because otherwise I would not have been allowed to do it. So the Universal Church never forbade usury, charging interest except to bishops, priests, and deacons. And I want to address the issue of courage in the philosophy, because I think that's key to the notion of what it is to have a Christian university, and the challenge of the identity of the Christian university, because I take it all the way into that time, just an illustration of the theme. And when we talk about what it is to have courage as a firefighter, as a sheriff, as a physician, we have some common understanding of what firefighters, sheriffs, and physicians do. But philosophers, we just don't agree. I mean, I live in the philosophy department at Rice University. I mean, I know that once upon a time people looked at philosophy as a way of life, like living as a Stoic. Well, my colleagues are sweet people, but they don't live philosophy that way. There is once generally, but not any more generally, philosophy is a real study of being, a science of being, and things that were produced. But you won't find that in most philosophy departments, in fact, probably even at Notre Dame. It's very hard probably. It's become an enterprise of discipline, analytic, and conceptual investigation, hermeneutical undertakings. Some phenomenologists and quarters of the departments, which you ask, what is a philosopher to be courageous about? And I think that's the key to the problem we face. I mean, what took place in the 1960s was a death of metaphysics, around which there was a collapse in Western Europe of both Western Christianity and Marxism, because they were both hooked to particular metaphysical views. So as we go to try to recapture the integrity of a Christian university, we have at least two conflicts. One, an enterprise that wants to be Christian in a post-Christian world, and then for some institutions, a second supervening conflict between what philosophy is. I mean, a Baptist or an ultra-Christian university, the first one will be enough. The second, though, is a second supervening challenge. Not just to be clear about what it is to be a Christian, so you can have a cheaper Christian university. The question of what you have to be a philosopher, so you can have a right-minded philosophy department. And I think that's one of the reasons we have such special cultural wars, as in Notre Dame's philosophy department and elsewhere. When one maps that, one understands those tensions. Let others speak to it, who live in the midst of it. I live only at Weiss, and we do have some of that.
Thank you for your very generous and thoughtful comments. I think and I was trying to sketch out what I thought the courageous role was for the philosopher to start with. And I think it is exactly that although we cannot accomplish it, we have to focus on the pursuit of philosophy as the pursuit of wisdom, and not simply we've gotten into very classy and sophisticated argumentation and lost sight of the pursuit of wisdom, and that's what we have to recapture. In my own philosophy department, it was suggested when I came aboard, to the great resistance of the members of the philosophy department, that philosophy had only to do with argument. And I suggested that they become a member of the communication study.
But everyone at the APA would understand that.
Yeah, they would.
That's where the cultural wars get iterated twice. One is it worthwhile being Christian? That's one. The second is, can we think about philosopher and the philosophical profession and what its courage is different from 95% of the people in the American Philosophical Association?
And I want to answer to yes. Yes to both of them. Yes, we can, but we need to do it, and that's what requires courage. I am sick and tired of being at the meetings of international bioethics groups and the Association of Practical and Professional Ethics and not having a single other person, or maybe there's one other person there to stand up. Kevin and I frequently find ourselves in those situations, and so Catholic philosophers are hiding. They're hiding under the rocks, and I want to say, Catholic philosophers, get out. Get out. I heard just last night, after Helen's address, the Catholic philosophers saying, I don't want to get into this discussion on homosexual marriage. It is really ugly. And Helen says, yes, it is. And I'm saying, yes, it is too. But so too are the debates on abortion. I mean, it was no fun to be spat upon and cursed at and to be surrounded by the police. But, philosophers in the past did these things. I mean, look at Socrates.
The reason for difficult, not just because the people lack courage. They don't even see it as a philosophical task.
No.
I mean, that's what is the real core. I mean, there are a lot of people who see it as a philosophical task and then don't have courage. Those are really to be chastised.
Corinna, you had a question.
I have an information question. I heard you say that the service, or one important service the philosopher does to the churches, help through their men and women efforts, intellect, all of that, develop doctrine. Now, of course, the simple thought of developing doctrine, even though I'm not part of your club, raises my hair. That's something that sounds to me so impious. But I was just wondering, what was the contribution of your analysis of the ontological unity, which is the constituent of merit? In what sense did that intend to develop the church's doctrine on marriage?
I see it as an attempt to develop the church's doctrine. In which direction? The nature of marriage is a union. And it is that that is the ethical entity that we raise other questions in regard to.
And your church didn't believe that?
No, I want to say my church believes it and says it, but it doesn't use it. It's a neglected notion. It doesn't do the work that it needs to do.
What are the consequences? So what is the church right now forbidding, or requiring
Well,
that you want to require, forbid, or permit?
Okay, what I think that helps, I'm not going to go, let me say, I've developed some of that in the books that John referred to. And so, and I can't do that in all this time. So what I want to say is we really struggle in the debate about homosexual marriage, about the imposition of the Catholic Church's teachings or Christianity's teaching on the polity. And so,
Excuse me, I'm not asking about you and the secular atheist. I'm just asking about the way how your philosophical account develops Catholic teaching.
how my philosophical...
Helps to develop Catholic teaching on marriage.
Well, I think it develops Catholic teaching in this way. It develops Catholic teaching in a way that understands the union as the essential nature of marriage, and that we have to understand that, and then we have to, through the pastoral work of the life of the church, make that very clear, so that marriage is not simply something that's accomplished by a physical union, the act of marital intercourse. Marriage is something that has to be accomplished over a lifetime. It's something that has to be worked at. And so if that is indeed the case, then we have to direct the pastoral and liturgical eye of the church upon that, and have that being an ongoing work of the church. We do not do that at all in the church, in the Catholic Church. So that would be something very important. Something else very important, and you really want to test to see how courageous I really am on this, right? And so the courageous point would be to say, or perhaps the foolhardy point would be to say, that the accomplishment of the reproductive finality in marriage, the regulation of the reproductive finality of marriage, has to be accomplished within marriage. It's an intrinsic end of marriage, but is to be accomplished reasonably. Okay, and so as a consequence of that, I want to say that the intrinsic contingent end of marriage, children, is inseparable from marriage, but it is separable from distinct marriage acts. That the marriage is the moral entity, not individual distinct acts. Okay? All right. There's one back there, and then I'll get to you, Jack.
Alvin Plantinga, 20 years ago, had advice to Christian philosophers. One of the things that they called for was courage. Advice to that. And it was courage to not take all of our cues from prestigious research projects and institutes and stuff like that, which is going on. This is a big problem with Catholic philosophy departments or Catholic philosophers. They still do take a lot of their cues. Instead of from Catholic philosophical traditions that are out there, that have been out there, from analytic philosophers, sometimes from continental philosophers who are very secular and not very helpful as well. Now, in order to have courage, courage is a virtue. And I think you got to add something. It's very difficult in the formation process. This is one of the things that plans to put his finger on. For the graduate student being born to push against them. And it's in a Catholic institution. They need professors. They need not be Catholic. They need Christian professors of any sort who are willing to do something other than merely steer them towards the analytic philosophy or continental philosophies and alternatives. They need other philosophers. In order to have courage, you have to have people before you have courage. They engage with.
Well, knowing that it's absent from most of the philosophy departments in our leading Catholic colleges and universities, as they do tend to take their cues from the University of Chicago or from Harvard or Yale, rather than to be distinctively their own, that's the very reason for something like the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture. And that's part of the motivation in its founding, to bring together Catholic philosophers and other like philosophers, those who are not in our club, that we come together and we support one another, and that we leave this place encouraged and growing. What we have to make sure that we do here is that we take up the hard questions here. And one of the hard questions is development of doctrine. I think it's very hard to take it up. If we don't take it up here, we let our young people be blindsided by what happens. And it was because of that, because we were so afraid of relativism, we didn't have the navigation to get through, to move away from what is infallible and absolute and we must accept in faith, and to navigate the problems that came in that particular period of time. And so that's... Okay, I just got a note from John Robinson that it's noon, and those of you who know John know that that's the end. And Jack, can I do you later? Or did you want to make a comment?
I would just comment then that this is so important, and I think your example of marriage is so important. And philosophically, I'm thinking back to Karol Wojtyła when he was a young professor of philosophy at the University of Lublin, began working on the idea of communio personarum, which ended up being a phrase in Gaudium et Spes at the Second Vatican Council. And so there was this interplay between philosophy and church teaching. And interestingly, I know from our conversations and from your work that you regard the genuine communio that is marriage to accommodate some artificial contraception. And clearly Wojtyła and then John Paul II took this same notion in his philosophical understanding of a genuine communio personarum that is marriage, and maintained to the end that such a communio cannot accommodate artificial contraception. I say there is a topic for Catholic philosophers of courage.
It is, and with that we'll close. Thank you very much.